Hey guys, welcome back to SNS University. I'm Coach Jacob. Today we're going to be talking about the deadlift, common technical faults, and how to fix them. So just to give you a general overview, the deadlift is a movement in which a load is lifted from the ground to the level of the hips. In the context of powerlifting, the hips, the back, and the knees are going to be extended at lockout. In both the conventional and the sumo deadlift for maximal loads, the deadlift typically does not involve any momentum and requires that both the load and the individual's mass be evenly distributed in the feet as a base of support. If you saw Jordan's mechanical principles of squat, bench, and deadlift, you'll remember a term known as the center of pressure, in which there are 2 points in which the lifter barbell system will have to stand in order to remain balanced during the movement. Effective execution of the deadlift is dependent on a number of factors, including but not limited to the assessment of lifter anthropometry. Some lifters have short torsos, some lifters have long legs, long arms, short arms, you name it. Everyone is built differently, and this is going to play a huge role in how the deadlift is executed. And this will also affect things like the starting position. Another factor that we can also talk about in terms of executing the deadlift is mental comfort, where a lifter might be intimidated by how heavy they're lifting, or potentially getting injured if they have a history of injury. Now we're going to take a walk over to the platform and talk about the setup. Let's talk about the feet in the deadlift. In the conventional deadlift, I want about 8 to 10 inches of width between the heels, with about 30 to 45 degrees in my toe angle. There's going to be about 1 to 2 inches of distance between my shins and the barbell when standing up straight. A good way to make sure that this is correct is by turning to the side without moving my feet and seeing that the bar is directly over my shoelaces. I'm trying to see if the bar is covering the knot, or if I have a metatarsal strap in my Olympic weightlifting shoes, this will be a good indication as well. For sumo, the rules are a little bit different. If you remember in Jordan's lecture about apparent length, the wider the toe angle, the more difficult it is for a lifter to balance throughout the entire movement. So typically when I have somebody learning sumo for the first time, I want them to take a narrower stance and a less aggressive toe angle so that they get adjusted. They may not have the hip dexterity and flexibility to start, but over an extended period of time of training, they can start experimenting with their stance width and their toe angle. That's the feet. So let's talk about the second step. After we set our feet at the appropriate distance, we want to make sure we have a nice, firm grip on the barbell. Depending on your grip style, you're going to have your hands just outside the legs in a conventional setup. You can do double overhand, hook grip, or mixed grip. For these purposes, I'm just going to take a double overhand grip. Note that I'm not just touching the barbell and wrapping my fingers around. I'm creating tension in my arms, locking my elbows so that they are like long chains connected to the barbell. And I'm going to squeeze it in my hand. I'm going to be having the barbell set right here underneath the crook of the fingers, rather than death gripping it right in the palm of the hand. The same would apply for sumo. Regardless of the stance, I'm going to be holding the bar very comfortably and firmly, but the hands are going to be inside the legs for these purposes. Note that in order to reduce the amount of friction during the transition from the floor to the hip, I might have to change the width of my hands. So while some people can manage maintaining a normal grip as they would for conventional, some people prefer bringing the grip in. Note that you'll lose a little bit of knurling here, so some people prefer using the hook grip to keep their hands on the bar. When we talk about friction against the legs, it kind of looks like this. Note that on the way up, my hands are dragging against my thighs. This is naturally something that happens for many sumo pullers, but through time and training, it might be a little bit uncomfortable, but you might get adjusted to it. That's the grip. All right, let's talk about step 3, making sure that we have the proper shin angle for both deadlift positions. After we set our feet and our firm grip on the barbell, I want to bring my shins forward by bending my knees. Note that when I'm doing this, I am not kicking the bar forward. That would defeat the purpose of step 1, and we'd have to start all over again. My shins are just kissing the bar and maintaining contact. My knees for the conventional deadlift are going to be slightly out and in contact in the crook of my elbows without taking them out of extension. For sumo, I'm also going to be in contact with the bar without kicking the bar forward. My hips are going to remain in their position as I bring my shins into contact, and I'm going to think about placing my knees in the direction of my toes. Remember our talk about toe angle? The knees are going to be following in direct alignment with the toes. There might be some wiggle room for this, and you might find that the knees might be inside the toes, but ideally, you keep them in line so that they're in proper sequence throughout the movement. That's the shin angle. Here's the next step, and probably the most tricky one, chest and back position. We're going to talk about the conventional setup first. Once I have all of the other steps in proper sequence and I get my shins in touch with the barbell, the final step is getting my back into the position to initiate the pull. Now, there's a lot of controversy about setting the back into a neutral position. I like to use the term static position. Whatever position you start with, you want to maintain throughout the entire movement. In my specific purpose, I can get my back into a very extended position, but I want it to be neutral. So I'm going to do this by pulling my shoulders back, squeezing my lumbar or lower back into position neutrality while trying to present my chest to the wall in front of me. Note that I'm not dropping my hips in order to achieve this, but I'm keeping my hips in position after setting my shins and trying to squeeze my back up into this position. Now note, the weight is very light for me, so when I set my back into extension, the bar actually floats off the floor. With maximal loads, this might not happen, but you will do what many people cue, which is to pull the slack out of the bar by initiating this. I'm not starting the pull per se, but I am setting myself into a stronger position to produce force. The same might happen with sumo. Note that once I do all the following steps, feet, shins, grip, setting my back will be similar. But note the back angle. It's a little bit more vertical when compared to conventional, and I'm trying to pull my shoulders up to the ceiling and getting my chest in front. That's chest and back position. So now we have to put it all together. But there's one final step in terms of getting the bar off the floor that I think a lot of people forget after putting all of those steps together. The deadlift is initiated by knee extension, which means, if you can visually apply this, you're pushing force against the floor. Think of the earth as a movable object, and you have enough power to move it. If you've ever done a leg press, that's exactly the same kind of motion that we're trying to achieve here. If you do your 5-step deadlift, feet, grip, shins, and you set your back with an effective brace, which we'll talk about later, you are going to actively push the platform away from you. Same would be applied for sumo. A cue that might be helpful, particularly for my sumo pullers, is not necessarily pushing the earth away from you, but trying to spread the floor apart. This way, you're actively using the quads in the movement, and it's not going to look like a stiff-legged deadlift. This is what a stiff-legged deadlift looks like. Versus shins against the bar and actively using my legs. That's knee extension. All right, guys, now that we learned how to properly set up and execute the deadlift, we're going to figure out some ways to troubleshoot it when things don't go exactly right. The first mistake that we can make when setting up for the deadlift is setting the bar outside of our center of balance. A good way to autocorrect for this and to practice finding pressure is by setting up with the steps that we talked about and putting yourself outside of your center of balance on purpose. I do it this way. Holding onto the barbell, I put some of my body weight into my toes without falling forward. Then I rock back into my heels without falling back. Then I slowly rock back and forth and find the center of pressure where I feel most balance. And I stay there. Then I execute a tempo deadlift and try to remain in that center of pressure the entire time, bringing the bar up and down. I recommend doing this for a 3-0-3 tempo, mainly with light weights or during your warm-ups. And that's how we find center pressure. The next common error is setting the hips a little too low. It kind of goes in step with the first error, but I'll show you exactly what goes wrong. If we set our hips too low, most likely we push the bar too far forward here. When we initiate the deadlift, we're outside of our center of pressure. For powerlifting purposes, this isn't necessarily the best, because when we initiate the deadlift and our hips are too low, the hips will naturally autocorrect back up to their original position where they need to be in order for the bar to leave the floor. Note how much energy is expended in this position, and the bar hasn't even left the floor yet. If we start too far forward, we naturally have to bring our body weight back. So some extra weight might be in the heels. And when we set the bar back down, we're no longer in the appropriate start position. So if you're doing reps over 1, it may make your set harder and much more not worthwhile. Deadlifts are already hard. You don't need to make them harder. So start in the position where you need to and maintain that position so that the hips can anchor the weight. That's what happens when you set your hips too low. The next thing I want to talk about when autocorrecting your deadlift is your specific back position. I say it that way because there's a lot of controversy about whether or not you should lift with a flat or flex back. I say it depends on the lifter, and it depends on their comfort level and their mechanical dispositions, anthropometry. So however they're built, if they have a super long torso, you might see some flexion sooner. Note that studies show that a lot of people actually go into flexion in loads greater than 90%. So this is actually a very natural thing. What we're trying to do in training is minimize that occurrence or put it as much under our control as we can. That being said, I personally am able to keep a back that is extended for a long period of time. But what we're looking for is a neutral position, which is a range between flexion and extension. That's going to look a little bit like this. Note that I start this way, and throughout the movement, I want to maintain this position for as long as possible. Note that there's a little proof that you'll be injured if you deadlift with the flex back. So starting in this position is okay, as long as you can maintain it. Note that people who lift with flex backs might find a little bit more difficulty locking out at the top. So once the knees lock out, you may have to compensate by setting the back into an extended position at the lockout. And that's how you keep a static back position. The next thing we want to talk about, and this is probably something that'd be good to learn prior to lifting, but I figure in the sequence of deadlifting, there are different areas in which you can brace. I usually teach my lifters after they set their shins. So if we go through all of the motions here, right at this bottom position before I set my back into extension, I want to take a huge intake of breath and hold it. But note that I'm not just holding my breath by inflating my chest and keeping it proud. I'm trying to get as much air into my intra-abdominal cavity, and I want to squeeze my abs around it like I'm about to get punched in the stomach. This is called the Valsalva maneuver. This minimizes our risk of passing out during lifting and also gives us a lot more pressure so we can maintain rigid in our movements. Note that this is a very concentrated effort and shouldn't be done passively. Everything about lifting is aggressive. So I'm going to take a very aggressive breath and push my abs out as hard as I can. And that's how you brace. Okay guys, so that was a lot of information, but we're just going to do one final recap here. I'm going to start with my first step, feet underneath the barbell. This is for my conventional lifters. We'll talk about sumo maybe in a second. 1 to 2 inches between myself and the barbell, 8 to 10 inches between me and my heels, about 30 to 45 degrees toe angle. I'm going to set my grip nice and strong, not passive. Grip the barbell as hard as you can. Next step, touch my shins to the barbell without kicking it forward. Last step, I want to get my back and chest into right position with a nice strong brace. For instructional purposes, I'm going to let go of my brace and show you the bar path. Use knee extension, push hard against the floor, keeping the bar against your legs the entire way up and the entire way down, back to the starting position so you don't have to reset. So we're going to show that again without me talking. And I don't want to forget my sumo pullers. Love you guys. Find your stance. Narrow works best for me. These steps are very general and are really good for the novice lifter. Hopefully they help you become a 600 puller. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope the video was very informative. If you have any questions or comments, just make sure you leave them down at the bottom. If you'd like to check out our gym and what we offer through our coaching services, make sure to go to our website and visit us on Instagram. If you're in the New York City area, come by, get a drop-in, and maybe talk to one of our coaches on how you can improve your barbell journey. Thanks. See you soon.